1. JODINE SERRIN. On Valentine's Day in 2007, Art and Lois SERRIN went to visit their 39-year-old daughter, JODINE, at her condo. JODINE was mentally disabled, and even though she was able to live independently, she still required frequent visits from her parents to check in on her. When the SERRINs arrived at the condo that night, the lights were on, but they could not unlock the front door because the safety chain was latched. After receiving no answer when they called out JODINE's name, Art burst open the door. He walked into JODINE's darkened bedroom and was surprised to find an unidentified man having sex with his daughter. Art told the man to get dressed and leave. The parents waited in the living room to allow their daughter a moment of privacy. They expected an embarrassed couple to exit the bedroom, but no one did. After several minutes had passed, the SERRINs returned to the bedroom and were treated to a horrifying sight. JODINE's lifeless, nude body was now lying on the bed. She had been beaten and strangled to death. Incredibly, JODINE's killer had been brazen enough to quietly sneak out of the condo before they discovered what he had done. Investigators later found that she had been dead for between 12 and 24 hours. Police have no leads, but they do have a complete genetic profile from DNA collected at the scene. There is a $52,000 reward for information leading to an arrest in this case. In early 2017, Parabon Nano Labs used their cutting-edge technology, which usually costs around $4,000 a scan, to type the DNA left at the crime scene in a state-of-the-art process known as phenotyping. This cutting-edge process uses the collected DNA sample to scan for many features of its beholder, including skin color, eye color, hair color, gender, ancestry, and face shape. This technology even has the ability to foretell if the owner of the DNA has freckles or not. According to the phenotyping, the male suspect who murdered SERRIN had very fair skin, green or blue eyes, blonde or brown hair, and some freckles. He is likely in his 40s and of Northern European descent. Based on the eyewitness account of the night of his daughter's murder, JODINE SERRIN's father's description of the suspect also led the police to believe that the suspect is burly with a flabby stomach and unkempt hair. Based on the evidence presented, the murderer is between 5'8" and 6 foot tall. However, the efforts made in this investigation have not yet resulted in the arrest of the person responsible for this tragic murder. 2. ARLIS Perry. ARLIS Perry was a 19-year-old woman from Bismarck, North Dakota, who moved to Stanford, California, to live with her husband, Bruce Perry, a sophomore student at Stanford University. On the night of October 12, 1974, ARLIS and Bruce got into a small argument about their car's tire pressure while walking around campus. ARLIS decided that she wanted to be alone for a while and walked to the Stanford Medical Church by herself. She went into the church shortly before midnight. According to the security guard, Crawford, he closed the church a little after midnight. Crawford told investigators that he found all the doors locked when he later checked the church at around 2 a.m. Bruce, meanwhile, was starting to get worried. ARLIS still hadn't come home yet. After driving around campus looking for her, Bruce called the police at around 3 a.m. They checked the church but found that the doors were still locked. At about 5:45 a.m., when Crawford came to open the church, he saw that the door on the west side of the church was open. It had been forced from the inside. As he walked inside, he discovered ARLIS's body under a pew. She was lying on her back, naked from the waist down, with her legs spread apart. She hadn't been raped, but she had been sexually assaulted with a candlestick. Another candlestick was pushed in between her breasts. Her death was caused by blows to the back of the head with an ice pick, which was found lodged in her skull. A palm print was found on one of the candles, and a trace of semen was discovered on a kneeling pillow. Neither pieces of evidence were matched to Crawford or to Bruce Perry. 7 people, including ARLIS and the guard, entered the building that evening. Only 6 have been identified. The remaining figure is described as a young man of medium build, standing about 5'10". Because of the location of the murder and the strange position of ARLIS's body, some suggest that she was killed as part of a satanic ritual. Journalist Maury Terry, in his 1987 book The Ultimate Evil, theorized that an associate of serial killer David Berkowitz, the infamous son of Sam, was the murderer. In 1979, Berkowitz sent a book to authorities in North Dakota, in which, in the margin, he's reported to have scrawled, "ARLIS, Perry, hunted, stalked, and slain, followed to California, Stanford University." While behind bars, Berkowitz claimed that he'd joined a satanic cult in 1975 and that he'd killed in collaboration with other members, at least one of whom hailed from North Dakota. Berkowitz was interviewed by law enforcement, but no arrests were made. Terry further proposed that the killer was a local Stanford man who happened to be named Bruce Perry, but not the victim's husband. Prior to her murder, ARLIS had even stumbled across the other Bruce Perry in a Stanford phone book and mentioned it in letters to friends. After the killing, the other Bruce Perry vanished and has never been located. Rather than writing it off as an odd coincidence, Terry thinks that this other Bruce was ordered to kill ARLIS by a satanic cult she allegedly met before moving to California. Authorities, however, have long dismissed this theory. Furthermore, Berkowitz's clique of fellow murderous Satanists have never been proven to exist, and investigators are skeptical that he knows anything about ARLIS's murder. The only other possible lead comes from an attorney who practiced at the law firm where ARLIS was working as a secretary. The day before her murder, the attorney said he saw ARLIS arguing with an unfamiliar man he assumed was her husband. The man turned out not to be ARLIS's husband, however, and has never been identified. 3. The Colonial Parkway Killer. On October 12, 1986, Kathleen Thomas and Rebecca Ann Dowski were found with their throats slashed in Thomas's Honda Civic. The car had been pushed down an embankment along the Colonial Parkway. Investigators found that the women had rope burns and signs of strangulation before their throats were slashed. There was no evidence of sexual assault and no sign of a robbery. One of the women appears to have fought with the assailant. Investigators found a clump of hair in Thomas's fingers. It also appeared that the killer attempted to set fire to their bodies and their vehicle, but was unsuccessful. This would be the very first attack by an unknown killer who murdered at least 8 individuals and possibly an additional 4 more in the Colonial Parkway area of Virginia. The serial killer has never been found, and the Colonial Parkway murders remain unsolved to this day. In September of 1987, David Knobling and Robin Edwards disappeared. Knobling's truck was found at the Ragged Island Wildlife Refuge near Smithfield, Virginia. The keys were in the ignition, and the driver's side door was open. The radio was on, and Knobling's wallet was found on the dash. Several days later, their bodies washed up along the shore of the James River, 2 miles downriver in the Ragged Island Refuge. They had both been shot to death. Knobling and Edwards were both partially clothed. Knobling was wearing jeans. The belt on Edwards' jeans was not fastened. Her bra was around her neck, under her blouse. Edwards and Knobling's underwear were both found in the truck. Police believed they were marched from the truck to the river, where they were executed and dumped. In April of 1988, Cassandra Lee Harry and Richard Keith Call were reported missing after attending a party for Newport News. Keith's car was found along the Colonial Parkway the next day. Again, the driver's side door was ajar, and the keys were in the ignition. The glove box was open. All of the couple's clothing was found in the back seat of the car, meaning they had left the car completely nude. There was no sign of a struggle. Neither body has been found, but they are presumed dead. In October 1989, hunters in the woods of New Kent County, near the rest stop between Richmond and Williamsburg, discovered the skeletal remains of Anna Marie Phelps and Daniel Lauer. They had been last seen on September 5, 1989. Lauer's gold 1973 Chevrolet Nova was found parked at the rest stop on the westbound side of I-64 that same day. Again, the keys were in the ignition and the gas tank was 3/4 full. Miss Phelps' purse was in the car, and some of Lauer's clothing was also found in the car. Their bodies were found less than a mile from the rest stop. Although the state of decomposition made it difficult to determine a cause of death, police believe they were stabbed to death. Other possibly linked victims are Brian Craig Pettinger, whose body was found in February 1998 along the James River near Suffolk, and Lori Ann Powell, who was discovered on April 2, 1988 along the James River. Miss Powell had been stabbed multiple times. In addition, the 1984 murders of Michael Margaret and Donna Hall bear a resemblance to the later Colonial Parkway killings. On August 24, 1984, the bodies of Michael Margaret and his girlfriend, Donna Lynn Hall, were found in a wooded area just west of Richmond, Virginia. They were about 70 feet from Michael Margaret's Jeep. They had been stabbed multiple times, and their throats had been slashed. There was no apparent motive. The couple had told friends that they were going camping. Margaret's Jeep, found near the bodies, held suitcases and a cooler. Money did not appear to be a motivation in any of these murders, and the victims did not appear to struggle. Law enforcement officials began to theorize that the serial killer was either a law enforcement officer or posing as an authority figure. This may explain why Cal's glove box was opened, in an attempt by Cal to obtain his registration, which is normally held in the glove box. In addition to the theory of the Colonial Parkway killer being a law enforcement officer or posing as one, others suggest that the killer may be a rogue CIA operative from the Central Intelligence Agency, which has a training center in a nearby Camp Perry in York County. Others claim it may have been more than one killer working as a team. In January of 2010, the case was reopened by the FBI. There was quite a substantial set of evidence that had never been tested for DNA. Although initially indicating that DNA testing would be completed in 2010, the testing continued to the fall of 2011. As of today, no one has been identified as the killer. 4. St. Louis Jane Doe. On February 28, 1983, two men looking for a piece of metal to fix a car's timing chain made a very grisly discovery inside a vacant apartment building on 5365 Clemens Avenue. In the basement, they found the body of a young girl wearing only a dirty yellow sweater. She had been positioned on her stomach and was nude from the waist down. Her hands were tied behind her back with a red and white nylon rope, and her head was missing. She was believed to have been strangled 3 to 5 days earlier and was then disposed of in the basement of an abandoned house. She was initially believed to possibly be a prostitute until the police had moved her body and discovered that she did not have developed breasts, indicating that she had not gone through puberty. Further examination was conducted within the next week. It was concluded that the victim was not killed at the location where she was discovered, as no traces of blood were found by the body. Her head had been severed cleanly by a large blade, possibly a carving knife. She was estimated to be between 8 and 11 years old and was prepubescent, but had been sexually assaulted. She wore only a V-neck yellow long-sleeve sweater and 2 layers of pink and purple nail polish. Her head has never been found, but the fingerprints, footprints, and DNA information have been collected. Because there were no distinct marks or deformities on her body, except for spina bifida occulta, it is unlikely that she would be identified. She was given 2 nicknames to honor her life: Hope and Little Jane Doe. 4 missing girls have been ruled out as the victim, as well as the Northampton County Jane Doe from North Carolina, who was ruled out to be the remaining parts of the body. She was approximately 4'10" to 5'6" tall when she was alive. After 10 months, her burial took place in December 1983. In 2013, authorities decided to exhume the body in order to gather more forensic information about the victim. The remains had been misplaced, along with many other bodies in the Washington Park Cemetery by 2013 due to negligence of cemetery records, and her body was not found until late June. The remains were located by using a camera calibration technique to determine precisely where a photograph of the casket had been taken on the day of the burial. After tests on samples of her bones were concluded, the victim is believed to have spent a large portion of her life in one of the 10 southeastern states: Florida, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, Arkansas, Texas, Tennessee, and the Carolinas. Her sweater had previously been sent to a psychic in Florida, but was never returned, presumably lost in the mail. She was largely assumed to have been the victim of Vernon Brown. In the mid-1970s, Vernon Brown was convicted of molesting a 12-year-old girl, subsequently spending 4 years in Indiana in 1980. After his release, 9-year-old Kimberly Campbell was found sexually assaulted and strangled in a vacant home owned by his grandmother. However, despite being the clear suspect in the murder, not enough evidence could be obtained to charge him with the crime. Years later, Vernon lived on Enright Avenue in St. Louis, Missouri, but was using a phony name of Thomas Turner. On October 24, 1926, Vernon just arrived back home after picking up his stepchildren from school. At approximately 3 p.m., he was sitting on his front porch watching children walk home after being dropped off by the school bus. During this time, 9-year-old Janet Perkins was passing by on her 15-minute walk home. That's when Vernon took notice and enticed Janet into his home. Although the stepchildren saw her come inside, Vernon ordered them to their bedrooms and locked the doors from the outside. Moments later, he led Janet down to his basement, where he bound her feet and only one hand with a wire coat hanger. He then began to strangle her to death with a rope, all of this happening while the stepchildren could hear her screams through the vents. 3 days later, the police arrested Vernon after discovering 2 trash bags containing Janet's body in an alleyway behind his home. During his prison stint, the police frequently questioned him about other possible victims, particularly little Jane Doe, but he never confessed to her or any other murders. The police suspect Vernon Brown may be involved with at least 20 unsolved murder cases. Brown was executed in 2005 and never confessed to murdering little Jane Doe. She remains unidentified to this date. 5. The Circleville Letters. In 1976, the citizens of Circleville, Ohio, began receiving sinister handwritten letters. The anonymous author knew many personal details about each resident and claimed to be watching them. They were postmarked from nearby Columbus without a return address. The most dangerous letters were directed at Mary Gillespie. The Circleville letter writer accused the local bus driver of having an affair with the superintendent of schools. One of the threatening letters said, "I know where you live. I've been observing your house. I know you have children. This is no joke. Please take it serious." Within 8 days, Mary received a similar letter. She kept the letters to herself until her husband, Ron, received one as well. The letter stated that if Ron did not stop his wife's affair, his life would be in danger. After 2 weeks, a new letter arrived at the Gillespie door. "Gillespie, you have had 2 weeks and done nothing. Admit the truth and inform the school board. If not, I will broadcast it on CBS, posters, signs, and billboards until the truth comes out." Mary and Ron only told 3 people about the letters: Ron's sister, her husband, Paul Fresher, and Paul's sister. Mary had some ideas about who might be sending the letters. They decided to have Paul write letters to the suspect, claiming that they know who he or she was. Their plan seemed to work. The letters stopped for several weeks. However, that changed on August 19, 1977, when Ron received a phone call from the alleged writer. Mary never did find out what was said or who made the call, but it was assumed to be the phantom author. Ron lost his temper, grabbed his pistol, and left the house. At an intersection close to where they lived, Ron's vehicle struck a tree and killed Ron Gillespie. If the caller was indeed the letter writer, then he or she had clearly carried out on the threat to Ron's life. When police investigated the crash, they discovered that Ron's gun had been fired once. Detectives could find no reason or excuse for Ron to have fired at all, whether it was deliberate or not. The crash happened moments after Ron drove away, and no shot was reported. Sheriff Dwight Radcliffe questioned and eliminated at least one suspect in the case. He then ruled Ron's death an accident, claiming that he had lost control and crashed while driving drunk. However, several residents soon received letters stating that Sheriff Radcliffe had been involved in a cover-up. According to Paul, Sheriff Radcliffe initially agreed that the death was the result of foul play. However, he allegedly changed his mind when the suspect passed a polygraph test. Ron's blood alcohol level was 0.16, which was twice the legal limit. However, many of Ron's friends and family were surprised by this. They did not think that he was a heavy drinker. After Ron's death, the letters kept coming. His wife, Mary, and the superintendent of schools eventually admitted to a relationship, but said it had begun after the letters were sent. Mary kept her job driving a school bus. In February of 1983, Mary was harassed along her bus route. The letter writer apparently began placing threatening signs next to the road. One day, Mary had had enough and decided to go and rip the sign down. When she did, she discovered a booby trap designed to kill her. The trap had a box which contained a small pistol. If Mary had pulled the sign off in a certain way, the gun would have fired. Police examined the firearm. While the serial number was partially scratched off, it was traceable. The weapon had belonged to Mary's former brother-in-law, Paul Fresher, who had recently separated from Ron's sister. Paul, however, claimed the gun had been stolen, but never reported it stolen. On February 25, 1983, Sheriff Radcliffe asked Paul to meet with him and take a handwriting test. He asked Paul to try and copy the handwriting from the letters. The sheriff also searched Paul's garage. He turned all the evidence he gathered over to the courts. On October 24, 1983, Paul went on trial for the attempted murder of Mary. Although he was never charged with writing the threatening letters, they became a crucial part of the evidence against him. A handwriting expert testified that Paul was the letter writer. Mary also testified that she believed that he was the writer after his wife visited her with the same suspicion. Paul's boss also testified that he was not at work on the day that the booby trap was found. Even though Paul had a solid alibi for almost the entire day, he never took the stand in his own defense. Paul Fresher was given the maximum sentence for attempted murder, 7 to 25 years. Everyone assumed that he had written the Circleville letters, and everyone figured they would stop once Paul was in prison. But the letters continued. All of them were postmarked from Columbus, even though Paul was imprisoned across the state in Lima. While there, he himself received letters from the writer. It read, in part, "Now, when are you going to believe that you aren't going to get out of there? I told you 2 years ago, when we set 'em up, they stay set up. Don't you listen at all?" In December 1990, Paul became eligible for parole. He was denied parole due to the letters, even though there was no way he could have been sending them. In May of 1994, Paul Fresher was finally granted parole after serving 10 years. Paul maintained his innocence until his death in 2012. 6 months after Fresher's release, TV show Unsolved Mysteries aired a segment on the Circleville letters. A few days later, the network received a postcard, apparently from the letter writer. It said, "Forget Circleville, Ohio. Do nothing to hurt Sheriff Radcliffe. If you come to Ohio, you El Sickos will pay." And it was signed by the Circleville writer. While the sending of the Circleville letters has ceased, the mystery behind their writer remains unknown.